Welcome back. Welcome to the Premier Mindset by Premier Performance LLC. I'm your host, Trent Mailer, LCSW, licensed clinical therapist and performance coach, and this is episode 60. There's a moment after trust is broken that almost every high performer gets wrong. It's not the mistake itself, it's what happens right after. Because most people think the problem is what they did. It's not. The problem is how they try to fix it. And that's where things actually get worse. You've seen this before, maybe in a team, maybe in a locker room, maybe in a business environment. A leader makes a call that backfires. An athlete breaks discipline in a moment that matters. Someone says something they shouldn't have, or doesn't follow through when counted on. And immediately after, they try to repair it. They explain, they clarify, they apologize, they try to clean it up fast. And on the surface, it looks like the right move, but something feels off. The room is different. People respond, but not the same way. Conversations are still happening, but they're slightly more guarded. There's a pause where they didn't used to be one. That's the moment most people misread, because they think I addressed it, we're good. But they're not, because trust doesn't repair at the speed of explanation. It repairs at the speed of changed experience. Quick note before we dive in, this podcast is for education and performance growth. It's not a replacement for therapy or medical treatment. If there's something you need, make sure you go and get it. On top of that, social media accounts are all linked in the episode description. So make sure to follow along and get involved as we continue to build these things out. Now let's get into it. Let me put you into a real scenario. I was working with a high-level executive, sharp, decisive, respected, ran a strong team, moved fast, had high standards. In one key moment, he made a decision under pressure that cut his team out of the process. Not malicious, not reckless, but it bypassed input that normally would have been included. And it created a miss. Not catastrophic, but enough that the team felt it. So what did he do? Exactly what most high performers do. He addressed it immediately, owned the mistake, explained the context, reinforced his expectations, told the team it wouldn't happen again. From a leadership standpoint, it checked every box. But the problem wasn't what he said, it was what he expected to happen after. He expected the team to reset instantly. They didn't. And that gap, that space between what he expected and what actually happened, that's where most trust repair fails. Because what he didn't see was this. The team didn't need more explanation. They needed a new pattern. They didn't need to hear that it wouldn't happen again. They needed to experience that it wouldn't happen again, repeatedly, under pressure. And until that happened, their behavior shifted. Subtly, they brought things up a little later. They filtered input slightly more. They watched his decisions more closely. Not because they lost respect, because their trust model updated. And that's the part most people miss. Trust is not based on what you intend. It's based on what people experience consistently. Once that experience changes, trust doesn't snap back, it recalibrates. Now, this is where we introduce the first tool, the trust reality check. Because if you don't get this right, everything after this point is misaligned. You have to separate two things, what you meant and what they experienced. Those are not the same. And once trust is broken, what you meant becomes almost irrelevant because people stop interpreting based on your intention. They start interpreting based on your patterns. So the trust reality check is simple, but it's not easy. You ask, if I were on the receiving end of my behavior, what would I believe right now? Not what would I understand, not what would I justify. What would I believe? Because belief is what drives trust, not logic, not explanation, belief. And once that belief shifts, your job is no longer to explain your way back. Your job is to behave your way back. Now layer this with focus, because this is where high performers derail themselves. After trust breaks, they become hyper-focused on fixing perception. How do I get them back on board? How do I get them to see this differently? How do I smooth this over? And that focus creates pressure. Pressure to resolve quickly, pressure to restore alignment, pressure to get back to normal. But that's the wrong target. This is where the focus calibration shifts in a repair context. Instead of asking, how do I fix this quickly? You anchor to something else. What consistent behavior do I need to demonstrate now, regardless of how they respond? That's the shift. Because repair is not about their reaction, it's about your consistency under pressure over time. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth: most people don't fail to repair trust because they don't care. They fail because they try to repair it too aggressively. They overcorrect, they overcommunicate. They try to force resolution before the system is ready to trust again. And that creates a second problem, because now it doesn't just feel like trust was broken, it feels like it's being managed, controlled, pushed. And that creates resistance. Now, instead of just repairing trust, you're working around skepticism. And that's a harder position to recover from. So, by the end of this first section, here's what I want to be clear: trust doesn't break in a single moment, it breaks in how that moment is interpreted. And it doesn't repair through words, it repairs through repeated, consistent behavior that changes that interpretation over time. And if you try to shortcut that process, you don't just fail to rebuild trust, you reinforce why it was questioned in the first place. Now we're going to escalate this, because in the next part, we step into what actually changes after trust is broken: how people see you differently, how they interact differently, and how that shift quietly reshapes performance around you. That's where this becomes real. There's a moment after trust breaks that most high performers completely misread. It's not loud. No one calls you out. No one pulls you aside and says, I don't trust you anymore. There's no dramatic fallout. Everything just continues. Meetings still happen. Conversations still move forward. People still respond when you speak. But something has shifted. If you're not trained to see it, you'll miss it entirely. Because what changes first is not behavior on the surface. It's how people interpret you. And once that changes, everything you do starts getting filtered through a different lens. Let me put you inside a room. This is a leadership team, high-level operators, experienced, capable. The kind of environment where people are used to moving fast and thinking clearly. You're leading the conversation. A few weeks ago, something happened. A decision was made too quickly. Input was cut off. Or maybe you said something publicly that didn't align with what you followed through on. You addressed it, you clarified, you explained your intent, you even owned part of it. On paper, it should have been resolved. But now you're back in the room and something is off. Not obvious, but different. You present an idea. Before, this group would challenge you. They would push, refine, sharpen the direction. Now, there's a pause, short, subtle, that someone speaks, but carefully. Not wrong, not disengaged, just measured. Another person agrees, but doesn't expand. Someone else looks like they have something to say, but they don't say it. And if you're not paying attention, you walk out of that meeting thinking, good, alignment. But that's not what just happened. What happened is this: they adjusted, not away from the work, away from you. This is the relational consequence of broken trust. People don't disengage from performance, they disengage from risk. And you are now being processed as a potential source of risk. That's the shift. And once that shift happens, your role in the system changes. You are no longer just the leader. You are the variable people are managing around. Let that land, because this is where most high performers make the second mistake. They double down on communication. They talk more, clarify more, and try to get everyone back on the same page. But the issue is no longer clarity, it's credibility. And credibility is not repaired through explanation, it's repaired through experience. Now we need to bring in a tool at this level: the perception ownership shift. Because if you don't make this shift, everything you do next will actually make the situation worse. Most leaders operate from this frame after a mistake. They understand what I meant, they know who I am, they know this isn't me. That is intent based thinking. But the system you're operating in does not run on your intent, it runs on their perception. And once trust is damaged, perception overrides history. So the shift becomes this: instead of asking, "Did I explain myself clearly?" you ask, "What are they experiencing from me right now?" That question changes everything. Because now you're not trying to defend your identity, you're trying to understand the version of you that currently exists in the room. And that version is not built from your best moments, it's built from your most recent inconsistency. That's how the brain works under trust disruption. It compresses time and elevates risk signals. Now layer this deeper, because once perception shifts, something else starts happening automatically. People begin separating what you say from what they believe. This is where another tool comes in: signal versus story awareness. Every interaction you have sends signals: tone, timing, follow through, reactions under pressure. Those signals are objective, but the brain doesn't stop there. It builds a story around those signals. And after trust breaks, those stories change. Before, thoughts of "he's decisive, he moves fast, he's confident." After, it becomes "he doesn't listen, he's already decided, he's unpredictable under pressure." Same behavior, but different interpretations. That's the danger. Because now, even when you're doing the right thing, it may not be received the way you intended. You could say the right words and still reinforce the wrong narrative. And that's why over talking after a trust break is one of the worst things you can do. Because every extra explanation becomes another opportunity for misalignment between signal and story. Now let's go back to the room, because something critical is happening that most leaders never catch. You ask for input, someone gives you a surface level answer, you sense it's not the full picture, so you push a little and say, "Anything else?" They hesitate, then say, "No, I think we're good." That moment is everything. Because what just happened is not agreement, it's filtration. They've made a decision in real time. It's not worth going deeper here. And once that decision gets made enough times, the system adapts. Not around truth, around efficiency and safety. Now here's the emotional shift that hits most high performers, but usually too late. You start noticing that you're getting information later than you used to. Issues show up closer to deadlines. Feedback feels softer, less direct. People are aligned but not fully engaged. And the realization starts forming: they're not reacting to what I'm saying, they're reacting to what they now believe about me. That's the moment everything changes. Because now this is no longer about a single mistake. This is about identity. Your identity as a leader, teammate, or performer has been recalibrated in the minds of others. And here's the hard truth: you don't control when that happens, but you are responsible for how it gets rebuilt. Now, I want to sharpen this into something that should hit directly, because this is one of the most misunderstood moments in leadership. When trust breaks, people do not need more from you emotionally, they need more from you behaviorally. And until that gap is closed, nothing you say will land the way it used to. This is where we reconnect to something introduced earlier: the focus calibration, but now in a repair context. Because your focus, if left unchecked, will drift towards fixing how they feel about me, getting back to normal, proving that I'm still the same leader. And all of that is misdirected. The correct calibration becomes: what am I consistently showing right now? Where is my behavior still creating doubt? What signals am I sending under pressure? Because under broken trust, pressure amplifies perception. Every reaction is magnified, every inconsistency is noticed, and every moment becomes data. Now let's raise the stakes, because this doesn't just impact one interaction, it compounds. If this goes unaddressed structurally, here's what happens over time: decision speed slows, not because people are less capable, but but because they are more cautious. Ownership decreases, not because people care less, but because they trust systems less. Communication becomes more controlled, not because people are disengaged, but because they are protecting themselves. And from the outside, it still looks like a functioning team, but internally, the system is no longer optimized, it's stabilized. And stabilization is the beginning of performance decline. Now, I want to give you a line that you need to hear clearly, because this is where most people either wake up or continue missing it. They're not listening to what you're saying anymore. They're measuring whether your behavior matches it. That's the shift. That's the game. Once you understand that, you stop trying to repair trust with words. You start rebuilding it with precision. Because at this level, trust is no longer about connection. It's about consistency under observation. Now we're ready to go deeper, because what we've exposed here is the relational layer. But underneath this is a system that explains why trust breaks the way it does, why people respond the way they do, and why repair takes longer than most high performers are comfortable with. And once you understand that system, you stop fighting the process and you start working with it. That's where we're going next. At this point, most high performers are dealing with something they don't like: time. Because if you've ever broken trust and you're honest about it, you've felt this tension. I'm doing the right things now, so why doesn't it feel fixed? The frustration is what causes most repair attempts to fail. Not lack of effort, not lack of awareness, a misunderstanding of how the system actually works. Because once trust is broken, the system does not reset, it recalibrates. And it recalibrates in a way that is designed to protect against risk, not to reward your effort. That's the first shift you need to understand. When trust is intact, people operate off assumption. They assume consistency, they assume alignment, they assume your behavior will match your words. That assumption is what creates speed. But once trust breaks, assumption disappears. It gets replaced by something else: verification. Now, every interaction is processed differently. Not, this is probably fine, but let's see if this lines up. That's the system you're in. And until you accept that, you'll keep trying to shortcut a process that doesn't allow shortcuts. Now, let's break this down at a deeper level, because this isn't just cognitive, it's physiological. When trust is disrupted, the nervous system shifts into a higher level of threat detection. Not dramatic, not obvious, subtle, but constant. People start scanning for inconsistency. Tone changes get noticed. Timing changes get noticed. Follow through gets tracked. And here's the part most leaders don't understand: the system now weighs negative signals heavier than positive ones. This is where time distortion comes in. You could show up consistently 10 times in a row, and one moment of misalignment will carry more weight than all 10. Not because people are unfair, because the brain prioritizes risk. That's how it protects. So when you are thinking, I've been consistent all week, they're thinking, let's see if it holds. That gap is why repair feels slow. Now let's connect this to behavior, because this is where most high performers overcorrect. They try to fix trust with intensity, stronger communication, more presence, more visible effort. But intensity does not rebuild trust. It actually makes the system more cautious, because intensity feels like a spike, and spikes are unpredictable. What rebuilds trust is something much less exciting, but far more powerful: consistency. This is where the first tool in this layer comes in: the consistency over intensity framework. This is the shift from trying to prove you've changed to demonstrate that you are predictable in a new way. Not once, not when it's convenient, not when you're focused, but every single time, especially under pressure, because pressure is where the system tests you. Anyone can show up well when things are easy, but trust isn't built in ease. It's built when the system expects you to revert, and you don't. Now let's make this real, because this is where most people need to see it in motion. I worked with a high-level leader who had built a strong team over time. Smart people, high ownership, fast execution. But there was a moment where he made a decision that cut his team out of the process. Not malicious, but fast, reactive, controlled. He realized it immediately and tried to fix it. He addressed it in the next meeting, owned it, explained his thinking, reinforced that he valued input, everything you're supposed to do. But over the next few weeks, something shifted. The team didn't push back the same way. They still performed, still delivered, but the edge was gone. They were waiting more, checking more, holding back more than they used to. And his instinct, push harder to fix it, more communication, more openness, more reassurance. But it wasn't working because the system had already changed. They weren't operating on what he said, they were operating on what they experienced. So we shifted the approach away from messaging into structure. We introduced something simple but precise. Every decision that previously would have been made unilaterally now had to include a moment of visible input gathering. Not performative, consistent, every time, every meeting, even when it slowed things down slightly. At first, nothing changed. That's where most people quit, because they expect immediate feedback. But the system wasn't looking for effort, it was looking for pattern. Week 2, there were slight shifts. Someone challenged an idea again, not fully, but more than before. Come week 3, there was more engagement. Questions started coming earlier instead of later. And then week 4, the hesitation started to fade. Not completely, but noticeably. What changed was not his intent, not his words, it was his predictability. The system updated, slowly, through repeated behavioral proof. That's how repair actually works. Now let's go deeper into how you execute this in real time. Because consistency alone is not enough if you don't know how to repair micro moments as they happen. This is where the next tool comes in, the micro repair loop. Because here's the reality most leaders avoid. You're going to continue making small mistakes even while you're trying to rebuild trust. You will interrupt someone unintentionally, you will react faster than you meant to, you will miss a moment. The goal is not perfection, the goal is repair speed. The micro repair loop is simple in structure, but difficult in execution. You notice the misalignment, not later, in the moment, or as close to it as possible. You acknowledge it without defensiveness, not a speech, not a justification, a precise correction. Then you adjust behavior immediately. That loop, notice, acknowledge, adjust, is what prevents small moments from becoming reinforced doubt. Because without repair, every small miss becomes data against you. With repair, it becomes data for you. Now here's what most people struggle with: ego. Because acknowledging small misalignments consistently requires you to let go of the need to appear fully in control. But if your priority is looking consistent instead of being consistent, you will lose trust faster than you rebuild it. Now we layer in another tool, the behavioral proof repetition. This is the long game, because trust is not rebuilt through isolated moments. It is rebuilt through accumulated evidence. The key word there is evidence. Not intention, not effort, not awareness, evidence. Your team, your clients, your environment, they're collecting data points. Every interaction adds to the data set. And over time, that data set either supports he's different now, or that moment is still who he is. And you don't get to decide where enough data has been collected. They do, which is why consistency has to outlast your frustration. Because there will be a period where you are doing everything right and it still feels like nothing is changing. That's not failure, that's the system stabilizing before it updates. And most people quit in that window. They go back to old habits, or they disengage emotionally, or they assume it's not fixable. What they're actually doing is interrupting the exact process that would have rebuilt trust. Now let's bring everything together at the system level. After trust breaks, the system moves from assumption to verification, from speed to caution, from flow to friction. Your job is to not force it back. Your job is to earn the shift back through predictable behavior under pressure, consistent alignment between words and actions, rapid repair of micro misalignments, and most importantly, time sustained long enough for the system to believe it, not hope it, but believe it. Now anchor this idea because it's the foundation of everything in this episode. Trust is rebuilt through predictability under pressure. Not intensity, not explanation, predictability. And if you can do that long enough, the system will update. Not because you asked it to, because you showed it to. Now we're ready for the final shift. Because once you understand the system, the question becomes, who do you have to become to operate at that level consistently? That's where we're going next. At a certain level of performance, trust stops being something you feel and becomes something you are measured by. Not occasionally, not situationally, consistently. Because by now, if you follow this all the way through, one thing should be clear. Trust is not fragile because of the mistake. It's fragile because of what happens after the mistake. And that's where most high performers lose control of the narrative. Not in the moment they break trust, but in the way they try to repair it. There's a shift that happens here that defines the difference between average leadership and high level leadership. Average leaders try to get back to where things were. High level leaders understand that's not possible because once trust is broken, the baseline changes. The system updates. People are no longer interacting with who you were. They're interacting with who you've shown yourself to be under pressure. And that version of you becomes the new reference point. So the question becomes, what do you do when your past behavior is no longer working in your favor? You don't argue with it. You don't try to out-explain it. You don't try to rush past it. You outperform it repeatedly, predictably, without deviation. This is where we introduce the final integration point, the trust standard reset. Not as a concept, as a non-negotiable shift in how you operate. Because most people approach trust repair like this. I need to show them I've changed. That's the mistake. Because showing implies a moment, a performance, a demonstration. And trust is not built through demonstrations. It's rebuilt through patterns. The trust standard reset means this. You are no longer operating based on what you say your standard is. You are operating based on what you are willing to consistently execute under pressure. That becomes the new baseline. Not occasionally, not when it's convenient, every time. And here's where this gets real. Because once you make that shift, you lose the ability to hide behind intent. You lose the ability to say, that's not what I meant. You lose the ability to rely on your past reputation to carry on. Now it's simple. Your behavior is either reinforcing trust or it's confirming why it was broken. There's no neutral space anymore. Now let's connect everything. Earlier we talked about the trust reality check, separating your intention from how you're actually being experienced. That doesn't go away. If anything, it becomes more important now. Because during repair, perception is not just reality, it's amplified reality. People are watching more closely, they're listening more critically, they're interpreting more cautiously. That's where focus calibration comes back in. Not in a general sense, in a very specific one. Every interaction becomes a checkpoint. Am I reinforcing the new standard or slipping back into the old pattern? Because here's the truth most people don't want to accept. You don't repair trust by doing something different once. You repair trust by eliminating inconsistencies entirely. Now layer in perception ownership shift, because at this stage, defensiveness is lethal. If you start pushing back on how people see you, you start trying to correct their interpretation too early. You confirm the exact instability that you're already watching for. Instead, you absorb it, not passively, but strategically. You let your behavior do the correcting, over time, without needing to argue. And this is where signal versus story awareness sharpens even further. Because people are not just watching what you do, they're building meaning around it. Every delay, every reaction, every decision, it's all being interpreted. So your job is not just to act differently. It's to act consistently enough that their interpretation has to change. Not because you told them it should, because the evidence becomes undeniable. Now let's bring this to the highest level, because this is where leadership identity is actually defined. Not when everything is going well, not when trust is high, but when trust has been broken and you have to decide who you're going to be next. There's a moment that every high performer hits in this process, and it's not external, it's internal. It's the moment when you realize this is going to take longer than I want. This is going to require more consistency than I'm used to, and no one is going to give me immediate credit for it. That moment is where most people break, not because they can't do it, because they don't want to sustain it. The ones who actually repair trust, the ones who come back stronger, they make a different decision. They stop negotiating with the process, and they stop looking for signs that it's working. They stop trying to feel better about it, and they lock it to execution because they understand something most people miss. Trust is not rebuilt when people start believing you again. It's rebuilt when your behavior becomes so consistent that belief is no longer required. Now let this land. This is the moment that defines the entire episode. You don't repair trust by convincing people you've changed. You repair it by becoming predictable in a new way. Not louder, not more emotional, not more persuasive, more consistent, more aligned, more stable under pressure than you've ever been before. Because predictability is what the nervous system is actually looking for. Not perfection, not intensity, stability. And when people experience that over time, their system relaxes, their guard lowers, their willingness to engage returns. Not all at once, but progressively. And this is where most people make their final mistake. They start to see small improvements and they relax their standards. They assume, okay, we're getting back to normal. And they drift, just slightly, but enough. And the system catches it immediately. Because once trust has been broken, inconsistency is not tolerated the same way. It's magnified. So the real work is not just rebuilding trust, it's sustaining a level of behavioral discipline that makes regression impossible. That's the difference. Now zoom out, because this is bigger than one relationship, bigger than one team, bigger than one mistake. How you repair trust defines your leadership ceiling. It defines how much responsibility people are willing to give you, how much influence you carry, how much truth people are willing to bring to you. Because if people don't trust your consistency, they don't fully engage with you. They protect themselves, they filter, they hold back, and you end up operating with partial information, which means your performance, no matter how capable you are, is capped. But when trust is rebuilt the right way, through structure, not emotion, through repetition, not intensity, something shifts. People stop watching for mistakes, they start leaning back into the system. They start contributing again, challenging again, engaging again. And now your leadership doesn't just function, it scales. So here's the identity level truth that high performers operate from. Trust is not something you chase back. It's something you rebuild through discipline, not motivation, not intention, discipline. And how you respond, and how you follow through, and how you show up when it would be easier not to. And this is where most people fall short, because they understand the concept, but they don't have the structure to execute it consistently. They don't have accountability. They don't have feedback loops. They don't have someone calling out the micro moments when they slip. That's the gap. Not knowledge, execution. And that's exactly where real performance work happens. Not in learning what to do, but in becoming someone who can actually do it under pressure, repeatedly, without drift. That's what we do inside Premier Performance. This isn't surface level leadership conversation. This is structural behavioral change. This is tightening the system underneath how you think, respond, and lead, so that when pressure hits, you don't default back to old patterns. Because at this level, your outcomes are not determined by what you know, they're determined by what you consistently execute. So if you're serious about this, if you're serious about not just repairing trust, but elevating how you lead, then the question isn't, do I understand this? The question is, am I operating at a level where this actually gets executed? Because high performers don't separate insight from action. They close that gap immediately. They build systems that force alignment. They put themselves in positions where inconsistency gets exposed and corrected. That's how trust is rebuilt. That's how leadership evolves. And that's how performance becomes sustainable at a higher level. So as you leave this episode, I want you to sit with one question, not conceptually, but operationally. Where in your behavior right now are you still expecting trust to come back without earning it through consistency? Because whatever the answer is, that's the work. And until it's addressed, everything else is just surface level. This is what high level leadership demands. Not perfection, not intensity, precision, consistency, alignment under pressure, and trust. That is the system underneath it all, whether you're aware of it or not. Resilient minds, premier results. That's what we're building here with the premier mindset as we continue to spread this awareness and education so you guys are more aware of what's going on and how to deal with these situations. At the end of the day, recognition is the first step. If you don't see something happening, you can't do anything about it. This is why we're pointing these things out and talking about these things on these episodes to make sure you guys can see these issues before they cause problems for you. We want you guys to get ahead of the curve. As always, this episode is meant to provide tools for performance, not to replace individualized therapy. If you're struggling with anxiety, burnout, or persistent stress, professional guidance is critical. At Premier Performance LLC, we work with high achievers to implement strategies like these with precision, accountability, and results. Make it a point to give you all actionable tools to find success in your life. Let me know if it's helping. I love staying connected with all of you, hearing about the successes, the failures, the frustrations, the disappointments, and everything in between. Stay involved and let us know what's happening. Let us know if there's anything that we could talk about that would help you. I'd also love to hear how this episode specifically impacts you. If it feels like it's helpful or it's giving you something good or reminding you of something you haven't thought of, I'd love to hear that. If it is helpful for you, leaving a review can really help us grow and get this in front of more people, which is our ultimate goal. We want to just spread awareness and help people get more of this so they can do higher level work in their life. If there's someone in your life that you think could benefit from hearing this, send it their way. It might be exactly what they're looking for. They just don't know what's out there. Don't be afraid to send it to somebody. Worst comes worst, they just don't listen to it, and then no big deal. So if you have somebody in mind, send it their way, see what happens. If you have any questions, issues, concerns, or anything in between, anything I can help with, reach out to me and let me know. There's a lot of different ways to reach out. You can reach me through email at tmailer@premierperformancereno.com with my last name spelled Mahler. You can text or call me directly at 775-561-0056. I have the Instagram and the TikTok with the same name, which is premier_performance_Reno for both of those. I have the Facebook page and the LinkedIn page, which is both the same thing as well, same name, which is Premier Performance LLC for both of those. Then we have the Twitter or the X account, which is at Premier Reno LLC. And finally, our website is www.premierperformancereno.com. So get involved there. We put content out on our social media sites literally every day. We have a bunch of stuff on our website for you to check out. And we have new podcasts coming out every single week. So make sure you get involved and keep on following along as we build these things out and create that mindset to find success in your life with whatever you are doing. Next week, we're jumping into the topic of the hidden cost of being the reliable one within a company or a team. When you are the one everyone can count on, what costs are we not recognizing that break us down? We're going to dive into that and explore that idea next time. So go out and be the best you can be, challenge yourself, and put yourself in a position to find success, and try something you're scared of. Let's see what happens. If there's anything you need, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you guys soon.